Hello, welcome back again. So last time we talked about the perceptibility. Now let's talk about the other design heuristics, which is consistency. So consistency refers to using controls, using visualization, using layouts, using anything we use in our interface design consistently across both the interfaces that we design and what we design more broadly as a community. And this is a kind of a notion. Let's use the pointer here. So this is a kind of a notion for consistency. Now let me put it in simple words that consistency is something. We actually discussed about this in our previous lectures, that why do we place the push button for starting the car engine exactly the place where we need to insert the key. Now that's the consistency, is that we know that what the users are kind of habitual of, that the car would be started from that particular place. So if they insert the key, they rotate it, they ignite the engine. Similarly, the same place, the start button has been placed at the same spot, so you can just press the start button and you can ignite the engine. So that is actually the consistencies example, that we have to be consistent with our designs which the users are actually habitual of. So here the Norman says that consistency in design is virtuous. It means that lessons learned with one system transfer readily to the others. If a new way of doing things is only slightly better than the old, it is better to be consistent. So, of course, there will be times when new ways of doing things will be significantly better than the old, and that's how we actually make progress. It's how we advance. But if we are only making a tiny little iterative improvements, it might be better to stick with the old way of doing things, because the users are actually used to it. They are able to do it more efficiently. Now Nielsen here says that the user should not have to wonder whether different words, situations or actions mean the same thing. Follow platform conventions. So Nielsen of course says almost the same thing as of Norman. In other words, Nielsen says that be consistent with what other people have done on the same platform, in the same domain, and so on. Constantine and Lockwood define it as the reuse principle. So the design should reuse internal and external components and behaviors, maintaining consistency with purpose rather than merely arbitrary consistency, thus reducing the need for users to rethink and remember. Now here Constantine means that we do not have to be consistent with things that don't really impact what the users knows to do. The color of the window, for example, isn't going to change whether the user understands what the word copy means in the context of an interface. But changing the word copy to duplicate might force users to actually rethink and remember what that term means. Now, in this case, let's look at this example. Now, if you go to the Wikipedia or if you go to any other website, it's a norm that if you want to use a particular text as a hyperlink, the text color should be changed to blue or underline. Underlining and blue is a common norm. So when we see a text in a blue color, we exactly know that this is a hyperlink. So if we press it or if we click it, the window will open or we will be directed to another page which will explain that particular term. Now if you click here Atlanta, Georgia, so it will just redirect to you with the information of Atlanta, Georgia. So this is a kind of a norm. Now the norm has been changed to only blue color, but still many of the websites or many of the documents use the underline convention as well for referring to uh, the hyperlinks. Now another convention is the bold face. Now if you want to emphasize on a particular word, you use boldface, and it is also a convention to use it. So we are being consistent what has been done previously, so that the users should not have to rethink about it, that what this blue color means here. So in this case, the users exactly know that okay, this is a hyperlink and it's by convention. So we are maintaining the consistency to follow the convention, because if we do not follow the convention, the user may perceive differently that how it works. So we have to balance it. Similarly, if you can see here, this particular design, so it's consistent with the other versions of the PowerPoint, it's consistent with the other versions of Word. So we know that what is under the file menu, we know that how the insert menu is discovered, how the design, what are the options in the design value. So it's almost same. So if somebody using the previous versions of PowerPoint and somebody using the new versions of PowerPoint want to look for an option, they can easily look for it when the consistency is followed. So this disk button is saved, so we have made it consistent that this save button will save the document. So this is how we follow the consistency. Now the consistency, the curious case of control Y. Now we as a computer students know that the control X is copy, control C, control X is cut, control C is copy, control V is paste, control Z is undo, and control Y is redo. So most of the times control Y is redo. So in this case, see the NetBeans redo, the this one, the PyCharm, it has redo in Python, and in the Paint the control Y is redo, and the another interface it's redo. So everywhere the control Y is redo. But in Visual Basic the control Y is not redo. The control Shift plus L plus backspace is the redo button, and what control Y does is delete the line in this case. Now here the problem is that which convention you need to follow, because the earlier versions of Visual Basic like this, you will see that the control Y is to delete the line, and this is from the previous versions of the Microsoft. Now when the Microsoft like went to like newer versions of a kind of Visual Studio, the Visual Studio is actually the predecessor of Visual Studio is WordStar. So the Microsoft has to decide whether to follow the same convention or whether to maintain the consistency with its predecessor, or whether to maintain the consistency with other softwares. Now the Microsoft chose to maintain the consistency with its predecessor. So if somebody has used WordStar or somebody has used the older versions of Visual Studio, they should know that the control Y is not for redo, but it is for a kind of a deleting the line. But see, there is a kind of a trade-off here. Now the trade-off is that if somebody from the if somebody like me which has no experience of Visual Studio, let's say, and I do not have used Visual Studio before, and I am kind of used to of using Python or MATLAB or something like that. So I am familiar with control Y as kind of a redo thing. So if I have pressed control Z, control Z, control Z, control Z many times, and then I want to press control Y for redoing all it, if I press the redo, if I press the control Y, then the line is deleted and it is not recoverable. So if it is not recoverable and it is deleted, it means that uh, it's like I am doomed, because the line is gone. All I've done is read undo, 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 and all the things have been messed up. So if I am not familiar with the predecessor like WordStar, or I am not familiar with the Microsoft Visual Studio, then it might be a problem for me to understand that particular convention. But if I am loyal to Microsoft Visual Studio, then I should know this. So there is a trade-off, and in the first slide I already told you that it's not a holy grail. It's not a kind of a pathar ki lakir, okay, you have to follow it to a T. It's a kind of a thing that you have to choose, that whether you have to adopt it or not. If you want to adopt it, then you can just use it in your interface. But if you think that the consistency may harm your interface, or consistency may backfire on the users, then you may change it. You may not follow the convention. So it's your choice in this case, and the choice is to follow the convention or to make the users kind of a familiar with the things which they already know. So there is a fine line between that, and you have to choose between what you want to give to the users, and whether users are supportive of it, or whether the users do not want that. Because in this case, if the scenario that I already explained to you happens to me, maybe I'll not use Microsoft Visual Studio anymore. So you have lost a user for your interface in this case. So that's why you have to be very careful while applying these design heuristics into your application. And by the way, for your information, the Y here is for yank. Now the another design heuristic is the flexibility, and this is the notion of the flexibility here. So Jakob Nielsen says that the accelerators may often speed up the interaction for the expert user, such that the system can cater to both inexperienced and experienced user, allows users to tailor frequent actions. Now imagine one person is watching another person use a computer. The person using it repeatedly right clicks for cutting and pasting stuff. The person watching insists that they can just use Ctrl X and Ctrl Y for cut and paste. It's easy, right? Just press the buttons. Why are you right clicking every time? But the person working doesn't understand why the person watching cares. And the person watching doesn't understand why the person working does not use the more efficient method. So in reality, they both are right, and we have to design the systems for both of them, not just for the one. And that has been said by the Nielsen. So the Nielsen is most interested in catering to both novice and expert users, while the Ronald Mace here states that the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities, is more concerned or interested in accommodating the users of various abilities and preferences, but the underlying principle is the same. You need to focus on the flexibilities. You need to focus on what the novice user can do and what the expert user can do. So you need to focus on both of them. Now another design principle is equity. The notion of equity is mentioned here, so you can see that. So the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities, which has been said by Ronald Mace. And the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. That is, 1A, provide the same means of use for all users, identical whenever possible, equivalent when not, and avoid segregating or stigmatizing any users. Now, in some ways, these systems might compete. This says we should allow every user to use the system in the same way, whereas the above one says that we should allow different flexible methods of interacting with the system. In reality, though, these are actually complementary of one another. Equity is largely about helping all users have the same user experience, while flexibility might be a means to achieve that. For example, if we want all our users to enjoy using our interface, keeping things discoverable for novice users and efficient for expert users allows us to accommodate a wide range of uh, individual preferences and abilities. User experience in this instance means treating every user like they are within the target audience and extending the same benefits to all users, including things like privacy and security. We might do that in different ways, but the important note is that the experience is the same across all the users. For instance, let's see that we have this password. Now expert users know that the passwords should be this much long, and they should contain special characters, they should contain the numbers, they should contain the alphanumeric things. So the expert users knows that, but we have to cater the novice users as well. So what we can do is we can just provide a guideline that allow them to just write the password in the similar way as the expert users. Of course, they would not be as efficient, but by providing these things, we are making sure that the user experience in this instance means treating every user like they are within the target audience, like we have focused for them in our application, they are not left out. So that's what the equity principle is. Now another is ease and comfort. Now ease and comfort are two similar ideas that come from the principles of universal design, and they also are related to equitable treatment, specifically in terms of physical interaction. Now in this case, the design, Ronald Mace says that the design can be used efficiently and comfortably with a minimum of fatigue. And it also says that the appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use regardless of user's body size, posture, or mobility. Now here, in the past, these principles didn't have an enormous amount of application to HCI, because we generally assume that the user was sitting at their desk with a keyboard and a monitor. But as more and more interfaces are becoming equipped with computers, we'll find HCI dealing with these issues more and more. For example, the seat control in your car might now actually be run by a computer that remembers your settings and restores them when you get back in the car. That's an instance of HCI trying to improve user ease and comfort in a physical area. Now in this case, you may see that some people are actually comfortable, or they are easy to use these stuff where you can just play it, or you can, but sometimes the touch sensitivity makes it difficult for the users to operate such stuff. So it's better to keep it disjoint, or it's better to keep it like this. It depends on the user. So it depends on the user's easiness and comfort. As I gave you an example that the car is actually keeping the track of your settings and restore them when you get back in the car. So it has a kind of a user profiles, that which user is comfortable with which settings. So you have to uh, keep in mind that the users needs to have different profiles for maintaining the ease and comfort. Now another design principle is the structure. The structure principle is concerned with the overall architecture of a user interface. In many ways, it's more closely related to the narrower field of user interface design than HCI more generally. Now here, the Constantine and Lockwood, the design define the structure principle. Design should organize the user interface purposefully, in meaningful and useful ways based on clear, consistent models that are apparent and recognizable to users, putting related things together and separating unrelated things, differentiating dissimilar things and making similar things resemble one another. Now I'll explain you that in more detail, but uh, here it's a long sentence. But what it really says is we should organize our user interfaces in a way that help the user's mental model match the actual content of the task. What's interesting to me about the structure principle is that it borrows from a form of UI design that predates computers entirely. We find many of the principles we learned in designing newspapers and textbooks that apply nicely to user interfaces as well. Now, for instance, see this. This is a newspaper. The newspaper has the same things as the Lockwood says here, putting related things together and separating unrelated things, differentiating dissimilar things and making similar things resemble one another. Now here you will see that what they are doing in the newspaper is putting the similar things together and making the dissimilar things like disjoint with one another. And also, like if you have uh, the separate news, then what it does is it actually uses a line to separate them so that it may not be like mixed with the other stuff. Now just look at the newspaper and the online version of the Wall Street Journal. It's exactly the same. You have similar contents grouped together, you have dissimilar contents which are disjoint, you have a kind of de-emphasize and emphasizing text to see that whether this is a heading or this is the news, like a kind of a news detail. And similarly, previously what happens in the newspaper is that everything is mentioned here, everything is mentioned in the newspaper, so the text is quite small. But in the digital world, what we can do is we can click the link and we can get the more details here. So it's like a concise detail, a concise what we say is explanation of the news, and then you can go into the details by clicking on the link. So you can see that many things of this structure is borrowed from the newspaper. Similarly, there are many things which are borrowed from books, that we have sections. We have sections and we put the similar things, we make it episodic, and we make the stuff again consistent with the users which are used to of reading newspapers and books. And this basically the principle actually predates the computers, because that at that time the people were more into the newspapers and the journals or the books. So this is why the structure principle is quite interesting. It happens to be quite interesting to me. So now we'll move towards another design principle, which is the constraints. So in designing user interfaces, our goal is to typically make the interface usable, and a big part of usability is accounting for user error. Now many design theorists argue that there is actually no such thing as user error. So basically, if user commits an error, it was because the system was not structured in a way to prevent or recover from it. And I happen to agree with that. Now, one way we can avoid error is by preventing the user from performing erroneously in the first place. So that's the idea of constraints, to prevent the error from happening. So constraining the user to only perform the correct actions in the first place. Now Norman says that the constraints are powerful clues, limiting the set of possible actions. The thoughtful use of constraints in design lets people readily determine the proper course of action, even in a novel situation. Now Norman, remember, designing so that the users are immediately comfortable in novel situation is one of the goals of good user interface design, which is specifically emphasized by the Norman here. Now Nielsen says even better than good error messages is a careful design which prevents a problem from occurring in the first place. Either eliminate error prone conditions or check for them and present users with a confirmation option before they commit to the action. Now Nielsen here, for example, says that if our application was prone to users accidentally, it's like accidentally closing it when they don't mean to, ask them when it's about to close. as if it's actually what they're meant to do. For instance, if I have done some work of Microsoft Word and I accidentally close it, it will ask that whether you want to close it or you not, because your thing is not saved or what you have written is not saved. So that intimation is actually important, as the user wants to close it, or it's just press the close button accidentally and the information is not lost. Now both of these approaches refer to the need to stop faulty user input before it's even received. For instance, password example. Now in this case, this is a kind of a soft constant, the first two ones, because if you write something, it will not stop you to write. It will just tell you that okay, you are writing not so good password, so you need to write a good password so that it might be secure. So basically the example here, this is a kind of a soft constant which does not stop you for writing the password, but it just intimates you that okay, you are not going in the right direction. So it doesn't prevent us from doing something, but it tells us while I am doing it that I am doing it wrong. But the last option is the hard constant, that is can only contain characters printed on the computer's keyboard. So if you just copy the password from somewhere else and paste it, it will not allow you to do so, because that's a hard constant. It will stop you immediately. So the hard constant repels you from pasting a copied password. So that's the difference between the hard constant and the soft constant. Now let me stop here and I will I think okay, let me stop here and then I will continue my lecture for another video. So this is the part 3 and I'll upload the part 4 again. Okay, so now this is goodbye for now. Thank you.